Well, let me clarify, was a hacker. So, it was around the end of 2010 when I started giving some serious thought to committing suicide. I wasn't feeling depressed, I wasn't broke. Actually, quite the opposite. I had achieved everything I had set out to achieve materially and more. Barring any unforeseen events, I would have been able to continue my comfortable lifestyle without having to work for it till the day I died. So something inside me kept asking, why wait? I was made to talk to my physician, who didn't have an answer for me, but he did have these happy pills. The side effects, suicidal thoughts, depression, and unusually grand ideas. I steered clear of these pills. A year passed by, and this discomfort I had with my comfortable lifestyle, it turned into an angst. Every day I lived, I was just making up an excuse to not kill myself. I was too attached to my life. Now, you can find a lot of solutions for a lot of things if you think long and hard enough. So that's what I did. And I realized what had been bothering me was the suffering footprint of my existence. So what exactly is suffering footprint? Every act of consumption requires production. And every act of production, it seemed, caused someone to suffer. Now, when I say suffer, I specifically mean experience unwanted physical pain. This suffering is quite obvious for things like meat, for example. And for things like dairy and eggs, it's not so visible. And for most other things, it's a few more steps removed. So I started looking at the production processes of things that I consumed on a regular basis. And it seemed like even for something as benign as a bowl of rice, the number of organisms that suffered was immense. Farmland, agricultural land, comes from clear-cutting forests, taking away homes from all the birds and other animals that live there. Then the land is flooded, drowning and killing all the small animals that live below the surface of earth. In most small farms in India, a bull is used to pull the plow. It's not an easy job to pull a heavy plow through 6 inches of mud. If you guys have ever had your flip-flop stuck in the mud, you might be able to relate a little. Most old bulls die doing this work. During the process of plowing, a lot of earthworms and insects get crushed to death. It's not an easy way to go. So all of this suffering, this is just the production process. Then comes the harvesting, milling, packaging, and the whole supply chain for me to actually get the rice. That requires an industrial complex of factories, warehouses, road network, and transportation. All of that is fueled by mining for coal, petroleum, and metals at the very minimum. That has a horrible, horrible impact on the environment and all the human and non-human animals in it. This was a paralyzing thought, especially for someone who considered themselves to be a good person. I completely believed in do no harm, and here I was harming by the virtue of being just an ordinary consumer. And I was already a somewhat conscious consumer too. I bought used clothes, used books, used furniture. I had already turned vegan, so I wasn't consuming meat, eggs, or dairy. So all these big ticket suffering items were gone. But still, I had been using my privilege of being an able-bodied, resourceful human being to prioritize my comfort, convenience, and pleasure over everything else, overlooking my impact on others. So for my indulgences, others had to suffer. So naturally, I started moving away from unnecessary consumption. When I say unnecessary, I mean desire-driven. and not need-based. So it's not like I stopped eating or drinking, but I stopped drinking alcohol. I reduced my indulgences. I stopped traveling purposelessly. I reduced smoking cigarettes and other interesting herbs for that matter. And I still struggle with coffee and chips. So by reducing my consumption, I was reducing my suffering footprint. But this was just half the battle. I could lower my consumption all I wanted, but there was no way I could eliminate it. For me to live, even meeting just very basic needs, I had to consume something. Consume knowing fully well that others had to suffer for it. So if for me to live, others had to suffer and even die, then it followed my life isn't just my own. It came, after all, at a cost to others. This wasn't easy for me to accept. I had reduced the impact that I caused by my actions, but if I didn't do something beneficial with my life, then even my inaction had a suffering footprint. Now, I wanted to reject this, but just because I didn't like a conclusion was not a good enough reason for me to reject the outcome of a logical thought process. Up until this point, realistically, I had only been living because I was born, and I really didn't have much of a say in that. But to continue living, well, that was a clear choice. So I could have taken myself out of this system of suffering, but the system would have continued as it is. There's billions of other consumers. So a better value proposition for me was to stay within it and work towards reducing suffering. Basically, repurpose my life. So instead of living just because I was born or I was too afraid to kill myself, first time in my life I chose to live deliberately and make my life matter. My life mantra became consume to live, live to reduce suffering. And just like up until this point, seeking comfort, convenience, and pleasure had been serving as a yardstick for me making major life decisions up until this point, suffering footprint became my yardstick this point on. Now, I wasn't obsessed with suffering. I had chosen to focus on it because everyone tries to avoid suffering, irrespective of their caste, color, gender, religion, nationality, or even species. The experience of suffering is one of the absolutely real, unpleasant, and undeniable, and actually rather bad experience for all organisms, from an earthworm to a dog, to a goat, to a cow, to a human being. We all try to avoid unwanted physical pain. If unwanted physical pain is absolutely bad, then reducing it became absolutely good. So now I knew these two things. What I shouldn't do, which is to not indulge in overconsumption, and what I should do, which is to start helping reduce pain, especially for those who can't help themselves. Well, this was all fine and dandy. What I didn't know was how to do it. How do I break my addiction to consumption? Growing up, I was vulnerable. Like, I had my insecurities like most people. I had this need for acceptance and a desire to be happy. And I followed the lead of people on television. They looked happy, they looked confident, they were good looking. So I ate what they ate, I drank what they drank, I smoked like them, I even tried looking like them. So consuming is what I had been told was the way to live, the path to happiness. I think it was rather sold to me. But now the spell had broken, and I realized not only had consumerism utterly failed to deliver on its promise to make me happy, but it had made me cause all this suffering. I wasn't a bad person. My apathy had stemmed from a lack of awareness, these ingrained consumption patterns, and not knowing a set of alternative actionables. So, although I was aware now, if I could, I wanted to replace these, like I wanted to nudge myself away from these destructive patterns. And if I could just replace these destructive patterns, destructive indulgences with helpful ones, I could almost reverse my negative impact. Luckily, trying to stop the acts of overconsumption and helping others, they go hand in hand. It's almost like focusing on something bigger than yourself helps you climb out of this bottomless pit that you've been trying to fill with overconsumption. So I started turning my life around, reducing one cigarette at a time, and that's why it probably took me so long. And I was helping one animal at a time, nothing too grand, just the stray dogs you see in the street. I started feeding them. If one of them was injured, I would take them to a vet. I started learning some basic first aid. And I knew fully well that for every one that I was helping, there were millions I wasn't. And that was okay, because suffering is experienced on an individual level. So each one I helped mattered. And although I wasn't working for joy, but I got tremendous amount of joy from this, and it was much more fulfilling and lasting than any fleeting pleasure I had gotten chasing one new experience after the other. So I'd found this new template for life. Now I knew what to live for and how to live. But changing how you live changes the questions you ask. And now I was asking, how do I share this? How do I scale this? Again, back to thinking long and hard. But this time the answer came rather quickly. One question answered the other. Sharing it is scaling it. That's when I started People Farm. It is a house which has a clinic instead of a master bedroom. It has a cowshed instead of a swimming pool. It has space for people to come volunteer, be involved, and be inspired. It has space for us to organically farm while trying to reduce our harm. We rescue injured stray animals, mostly dogs, cows, mules, and cats. People eat most other animals, so that's why you don't get many sheep or chickens or goats or buffaloes on the street. People Farm is a place for animals to heal and be heard. This is Ponchi, one of our rescues. I wanted people to have a taste of how doing good feels great. And we have had more than 300 people come and volunteer. And when they brush a dog and then they brush a cow, the imaginary boundaries they have between companion animals, not okay to eat, farm animals, absolutely okay to eat, these imaginary boundaries, they begin to blur. But everybody has a different take home. Some people, like they quit their meat, like they quit eating meat. Some people reduce their dairy consumption. Some of them, especially from Indian cities, they go back home and put a doormat out for a homeless dog to sleep in a warm place on a cold winter night. Some, a bowl of water in summers. Some people have quit their corporate jobs and started helping small non-profits. Some people have even asked, how do we start something like People Farm? And almost always the first question is, do I have to be a millionaire to do this? So it was very important for us to make this project financially self-sustainable. So we started a farm stay. We started making homemade food items. And not only did these things bring in revenue, but they also helped carry our message far and wide. All of our products carry a message of compassion towards animals. They have a story of what we do, why we do it, and also a story of a homeless dog that needs a home. So the influence of all of this, it didn't just stay in the farm. It spilled over in the ways we didn't plan for. Neighborhood kids started hanging out at the farm, calling in rescues, practicing their English. A couple of guys who were part of the construction team originally, they are now part of the rescue team. They can even do minor surgeries if need be. Some veggie vendors started giving us old veggies for our resident pig, Pablo. And this one guy gave us land for free to grow grass for cows. and more girls in the village now know how to Google. So changing my lifestyle and life's objective, it wasn't easy, but it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. Our brains are so used to making decisions based on what we think is going to make us feel good. And for 3 decades, my brain had associated feeling good with seeking comfort, convenience, and pleasure. And it was somewhat hard now making decisions based on knowing what is rationally good instead of what felt good, because now you're operating on sheer willpower and it can be draining. But it took me 3 years to get over the hump, and it was one small decision at a time. But now, on most days, doing good is what feels good. And for other days, there are simpler pleasures of life. Thank you.